So, what happens after the ground stops shaking? It's a huge question, and it's not just about surviving the moment. It's about how entire societies have to rebuild, sometimes literally from the ground up. We're going to dive into the critical phases of what happens next.
Okay, so picture this. A massive earthquake strikes. The ground finally stops shaking. What happens right then? I mean, once that immediate, terrifying danger is over, well, that's when the real work begins. So what does that process actually look like on the ground?
And that brings us to this key idea, modifying loss. Now, this isn't about preventing the earthquake itself. We can't do that. No, this is about everything we do after it happens. It's all the strategies we use in the moments, days, and even years that follow to lessen the blow and help people get back on their feet.
This whole response, it isn't just one big thing. It actually unfolds in three pretty distinct phases. You've got the immediate emergency, then you move into the short-term efforts to get things stable, and finally, you have the long, long road to actually rebuilding.
All right, let's start at the beginning, the first response. This is the immediate aftermath, and believe me, it is a race against the clock where every single second is critical.
So in this first phase, there's really only one goal: saving lives, period. You've got search and rescue teams digging through rubble, just racing against time. But at the exact same time, this massive logistical operation kicks into gear. It's an absolute scramble to get essentials like food, water, and shelter out to people. You're setting up field hospitals, and you're desperately trying to restore communication lines because without those, coordination is pretty much impossible. And this really gets to the heart of the challenge: time. In the search and rescue world, you'll hear them talk about the golden 72 hours. That's the critical window where the chances of finding survivors are the highest. After that, those chances start to drop, and fast. It's that constant ticking clock that makes this phase just so incredibly intense and high stakes. Okay, so once that initial life-or-death crisis starts to wind down, the focus has to change. It's not just about rescue anymore. Now it's about stabilizing the situation and, just as importantly, preventing things from getting even worse. So now we're in the weeks following the earthquake, and the goals are totally different. We're talking about meeting the basic needs of a whole lot of people who have lost their homes. This means temporary housing, sure, but also, and this is so important, sanitation. Why is that so crucial? Well, think about it. When you have tons of people crowded together without clean water, the risk of disease just skyrockets. This short-term aid is really all about preventing that second disaster from happening.
And what's really interesting is who steps up in this phase. It's often the non-governmental organizations, or NGOs, groups like the Red Cross or Doctors Without Borders. They are just incredibly effective here. Why? Because they're flexible, they can move fast, and they can operate in really tough situations to get aid directly to the people who need it most.
And that brings us to the final phase. This is the longest and honestly, often the most difficult part of the whole process. This is the long-term effort to rebuild. And we're not just talking about buildings here, we're talking about rebuilding entire lives and communities. The big idea here isn't just to put things back exactly as they were. The guiding philosophy is to build back better. So what does that mean? It means building stronger, more earthquake-resistant homes. It means improving roads and power grids. It means creating systems that will make the whole community less vulnerable the next time something like this happens. It's a really forward-looking way of thinking. But, and this is a big but, this phase is absolutely littered with challenges. I mean, huge rebuilding projects can get totally derailed by things like poor governance or corruption. You can have different aid groups not talking to each other, wasting time and money. And there's also a real risk that if it's not done right, all this aid can end up creating dependency instead of actually empowering people to rebuild for themselves.
So aside from all this organized aid, there are two other huge forces that really shape how a community recovers. Think of them as two sides of the same coin. One is very formal and financial, and the other is totally informal and social.
Let's talk about the financial side first. There's a pretty stark reality here. In wealthier nations, insurance is a huge deal. It provides the money for people and businesses to rebuild their lives. But in a lot of developing nations, that tool just isn't an option for most people. And that creates this massive recovery gap when a disaster hits. But you know what? Money isn't everything. We cannot forget the incredible power of people. In pretty much every single disaster, the real first responders, they aren't the professionals who fly in. They're the neighbors, the family, the friends who are already right there. They're the ones pulling people from the rubble long before any organized help can even get there. So you really see these two paths working at the same time. You've got insurance, which is that formal financial system, and then you have community action, which is this informal social system that's built entirely on relationships and trust. And you absolutely need both for a community to truly recover.
There's actually a term for this: social capital. It's the idea that the strength of the bonds within a community can be just as important, sometimes even more important, than how much aid money comes in. Bottom line, a connected community is a resilient community.
Okay, so we've gone through all these different phases and factors. What's the takeaway here? What really determines whether a recovery is successful or not?
Well, it really comes down to a few key things. First, you need a coordinated response that flows smoothly from one phase to the next. Second, you need a mix of that formal support, like insurance, and the incredible informal power of the community. And none of it works without good governance to manage everything effectively. And of course, the whole time, the focus has to be on building back stronger for the future. And all of this leaves us with a really tough but important question to think about. We've seen how much things like insurance and access to well-funded aid can change the outcome for a community. It really makes you wonder, in a world where resources are so unequal, how do we make sure that recovery is a right for everyone and not just a lottery based on where you happen to live?